piece of poly tex. So this is the P70, and then that just gives us, if you're doing a lot of bow ties, it's great because it gives you this nice hard edge to trace your pattern piece on. It's kind of a nice template. I even marked where my grain lines are so that your bow tie is always going to be on straight of grain. So I've cut this edge straight, and now what we're going to do is we're just going to lay the pattern piece down, and with my white chalk, because we're using a black fabric, I'm just going to trace out my pattern piece. And I'm doing this on the wrong side. Because it's chalk, you can do either side. We're just gonna go ahead and do that, and do the other side. Now with the bow tie, you're gonna need 4 of these tails, let's call them. So you need 2 for each end of your bow tie. I'm just gonna go in through here. So what I do with a print that doesn't really have a pattern or kind of an all-over print, I'm gonna put these back to back like this. And if you're making a lot, it's kind of nice because you're kind of conserving your fabric. You're not wasting a lot. If you're doing a print that's quite larger or has more space between the pattern, you're going to want a fussy cut, so you'll have to cut each piece out individually. So from here, just gonna keep going. So there we have our 2 pieces. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fold this. Just going to kind of line up this side because that means it's straight and it's on our straight of grain. And what I'm going to do is grab my pin cushion, and we're going to just kind of pin this so that the pieces don't move around while we're cutting them out. Now you can cut this out with scissors, but I prefer to cut with a rotary cutter. I find it more clean lines, and because I've trued this up before I started, I don't have to cut this side. Just gonna pin in kind of specific areas. So there we go. I'm gonna take my rotary cutter, and you're gonna want a fresh blade or a blade that's not quite old. And then without putting a lot of pressure on it and keeping clear of your fingers, you're gonna want to cut out your bow tie through both layers of cotton. And on your curve, be careful. You don't want to push too hard because your cutting mat underneath doesn't really like doing curves. And I'm just kind of this out of the way here. There we go. So that's one side. And then we'll just get this out of the way. Again, just being careful around your curves. When we get to the end here, we'll pull this away. And then we'll just cut along this line so that our pieces are separated. So now we don't have to worry about that piece of fabric. So now what we're going to do is cut one tail out. And again, just be careful with your fingers. You don't want to get too close there. The rotary cutter blade is quite sharp. So there's one tail, and it's all pinned together. Right sides together. That's the nice thing about cutting with the right sides together, is everything's kind of just ready to go. Cut out the other tail. And then this piece is just garbage. So now we have our 2 tails. So after, what we're going to want to do is to cut out our interfacing. So you can either use, I like using a woven cotton interfacing that has the glue on the other side. This being, you don't have to fight with it when you're sewing it together. So with our piece of interfacing, you can either use SF101, or right now I'm using Camelot's Fusy Tex. They're the same thing, just difference in size. And I'm just going to put down this. And again, we're going to take our trusty pattern piece here. So it kind of makes it really nice for tracing around patterns. Now, because this is a lighter color fabric, we're going to use this friction pen, which irons off, and we're just going to trace around our template. Again, you're going to want to make sure you're on straight of grain, that you don't have any funky pulliness going on there as you're sewing it or tying it. And there you go. So I do have both 2 layers because you need 2 pieces of interfacing for one bow tie. You could use 4 pieces of interfacing, but personally I find that it's a lot softer and nicer to work with a bow tie that only has 2 pieces of interfacing in it. So we're just gonna cut this out. Again, careful with your fingers and not pushing too hard around your curves. So now you have your 2 pieces of interfacing. So next step, each tail is going to get 1 piece of interfacing. So we'll take all the pins out. So, okay, we're going to do that. And we'll put all our pins in a pin cushion right after. Just gonna separate these. And then we're gonna go move over to our iron. So make sure that the glue is facing downwards on the back side of your fabric. You don't want to put it on the right side of your fabric. And we're just gonna move to our iron. And according to, read the directions on your interfacing, but then also take into consideration your fiber content. You'll adjust your iron accordingly. So here we're just gonna iron. Now the key thing with ironing is you don't want to iron your interfacing too much. As heat puts it on, heat can also remove your interfacing, so you kind of got to be careful with that. So you also want to put quite a bit of pressure on it to make sure that it's actually going to hold. So there we have our piece of interfacing on our card. And we'll do this side as well. I like to start at the tail end and work my way out, just so that you're getting your curves pretty much lined up to your other fabric and nothing's going to shift too badly. There we go. So now we're just going to put our pattern pieces back together. Because the pattern piece that I'm using is my own personal pattern piece, and it's kind of, it's been around a few times, so most patterns will be symmetrical on both sides. Because mine is my own personal pattern, the curves aren't as symmetrical as they used to be. So I'm going to make sure my pattern pieces are on the sides that they were on when I first cut them out. And we're just going to pin this in place, so while we're sewing, nothing's going to move around too much on us. So I usually pin in about 3 spots. So you got end, the fold, and then the tail end. So once this is pinned, we'll go over to the sewing machine. So now, with my machine threaded, I use, and you might want to get in here really close, I use the inside part of my foot, so about 1/8 of an inch as my seam allowance. The reason I use this is you don't really want a lot of bulk in your bow tie, and I don't want to take out too much of my bow tie's final spacing by making a large seam allowance. So when we start here, we're going to make sure that we backstitch, because when we're doing the bow tie, we're going to come back. Everything's going to be pulled out through this hole, so you want to make sure that this opening is strong. So we're just going to keep going. I'm actually just going to put my needle down, and I'm going to adjust my size of my stitch. So now we have our 2 tails, and now we just want to double check to make sure that we've gone through all 3 layers of fabric, so your 2 layers of cotton and your 1 layer of interfacing. So just for the demo, I used a different color thread. I would recommend matching your thread. So I did all layers of that one. I got really close here, so I'm going to go back and fix that one up, and I got really close on this side too. It just makes it easier if you nip that in the butt before you turn it out. Just to make sure that you're not going to have anything poking through when you're right side outing. So we're just going to put that one off to the side. So we have this cool tool. It's called a loop turner. So I have mine here, and what we're going to do is, it's got this little hook on the end. So with that little hook, we're able to poke through our stitching and pull it back through. Kind of saves us a lot of time in the long run. So you want to make sure you're not using a super small stitch when you're sewing. I'm just going to pull that through here. This is the hard part. Normally what I would do is I would hook this end onto something else, and then I would pull this with 2 hands. We're going to take this bamboo point turner and we're going to stick it in. You don't have to worry about it getting lost in there as the back end is rounded. And we're just going to get that in there. We're going to take it right down to the tail end of the bow tie. So now we're going to find our little corners. And we're just going to poke them out. Now be careful, you don't want to be poking too hard because you don't want to accidentally poke right through your seams. So just kind of gently until you get a nice point there. That's pretty good. We'll go over to this side and do the same thing. Gently but firmly. And then on our way out, we're just going to kind of push on these curves a bit with the point turner. That makes it easier for ironing after. And then we're just going to slide that out. So next we'll go to the ironing board. So now we have that on our ironing board. We're going to start the tail end, and we're going to make sure that we have the heat setting right according to what our fabric content is. And I'm just going to kind of roll the seam so that it's kind of on the center of the 2 pieces of fabric. So I try to do only 1/2 first, and then I'm going to flip it and do the other side. Be careful, you don't want to put your fingers too close to the iron and burn yourself. And because the interfacing is already encased, we can use a little bit of steam. I'm just going to pull that down. And again, when we get to this end, we can kind of do them both at the same time by the time we get to this end. And you just want to steam that pretty good, because you want a nice crisp bow tie when you're done. So now we have our 1 tail. Now we have our 2 tail ends of our bow tie. So now what we need is elastic. I use Canso's P58. It comes in white and black, so depending on your bow tie, you'd want either or. And I use about 6 inches. So my ruler here, I'm just going to measure off. So once you have your 6 inches, a bow tie, the average size bow tie is about 34.5 inches. So what I do is I just put 1 tail end at my 0 mark. And I'm going to take this and pin it in. So you want a fair amount in there, but not too much, because you're going to need to put it in the other end. And you need it to equal your 34.5 inches. So once that's in there, we're going to pin it. So we start at 0. We take this end. And we're going to go to 34.5. And we'll put this end in to that. So just pin it in place. And then we'll head over to the sewing machine. Again, you want the same amount of seam allowance as what you did the rest of the bow tie, because we only folded a little bit of the fabric inside. And then you're going to want to definitely backstitch. And you're going to want to go over this quite a few times. You just want to make sure that the elastic isn't going to go anywhere from being pulled on. Okay, so we're going to start with one side of the bow tie a little longer than the other, not too much. Now the longer side is going to go over top, and then it's going to go underneath. And because of the elastic, we can pull quite tightly without choking Sir Frederick here. So now we're going to take this piece, sorry, can you get in there? And we're going to fold this in half. And this top piece that was the longer strand is going to go down through the middle. And then we're going to fold this into a bow. And there's a little hole in the back here, and we're gonna pull that bow through that side. And then now you just kind of got to play with it a little bit. Right. this collar down before we keep continuing to play with the bow tie. So you just, to get it tighter, you just kind of pull accordingly and you just kind of play with it.